Chapter 78. Want me to fix your umbrella? Alden looked over at Constantine. The adjuster was sitting beside him, running his fingers through his dark hair, trying to straighten it out. He was breathless, red-faced, and sweaty, the same as almost everyone who'd taken part in a heroes versus villains battle. Alden himself hadn't realized how depleted he was until it was over. Now both teams were sprawled across the bleachers. Most people were sitting slightly apart from each other. Emotions were still running hot for several of them. The strength brute from the hero team had started cussing out the right before they'd even left the floor, and it was probably only the fact that the guy had hightailed it out of the gym that had prevented a real fight. The object shaper was crying while Emma patted her on the shoulder. The sandbagger was shooting death glares. She only spared a couple for Alden. Khan was receiving the bulk of them. Lexi was wringing the handle of his whip like he was imagining it was someone's neck. He was glaring a lot at Khan, too, but to Alden's surprise his ire wasn't just for his brother. He seemed to be mad at every single one of his own teammates and Alden's as well. He wasn't yelling at anyone, though. Just darkly stewing. Khan was staring straight ahead, watching the latest batch of duelists. Alden glanced down at his umbrella. One of the spokes was bent and poking out through the fabric, and of course there was the broken fishing line. "I don't think they're going to make me fight much more," said Alden. "But I'd appreciate it, just in case, if it's not going to wear you out. Hand it over. I didn't get to show off my amazing powers anyway." "I think you showed off well enough." Alden passed over the umbrella and the broken piece of line. "It was when I not punched my big brother, right?" Khan said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. That was a memorable moment. Probably extra memorable for him. Khan held the umbrella across his palms and stared at it. "Now you get to experience my dolphin impression." "Huh?" The other boy opened his mouth, and the weirdest spell chant Alden had ever heard came out of it. Many chants were purely sound, the vocal equivalent of weaving a pattern with the Oriat. Some peppered in very old Artonan words Alden could occasionally recognize. This one sounded a lot like a dolphin trying to speak a foreign language. It was extremely alien, and surprisingly unpretty. Artonan tastes didn't always run in the same direction as human tastes, but their chants usually sounded pleasantly musical. This one was just strange and astonishing. There was a cloud of glittering light around the umbrella, then its damaged spots rapidly repaired themselves. It suddenly looked like it had before the fight started. "Let me do the fishing line next. Are your vocal cords modified?" Khan looked surprised. Most people are more interested in the instant restoration thing. "Yeah, they are." "Bullshit." His brows drew together. "You think I was born speaking like a cetacean?" "No. It's just... I'm sorry. That was a positive bullshit, I guess. I've never heard of an adjuster getting body-moded for vocal casting, and I think it's cool. I'm so jealous I could scream. A human scream. Not a scream perfected for spell casting. Positive bullshit? Must be an American thing. There are only a couple dozen other adjusters known to have vocal mods for some of their spells. My parents helped me look into it after I fixed. It's so cool. You said that already." He looked happy about it though. When the system spat out a rare type path opportunity for me, I was completely caught off guard. I was going to focus on spells that manipulate electrical energy. I've been planning to be an S-rank adjuster since I was 9, and it was going to be perfect. But when the contract offers you something you know is one of a kind, you have to take it. It's a thing, right? A thing? Khan nodded. "Yeah. Everyone knows that singleton paths, subclasses, or talents are usually higher potential. Sometimes they're a flop, but most of the time, they pay off. It was just one starter spell, which seemed so ungenerous. But I took it, and the next thing I knew the system was like, and here is your new alien voice to go with that spell. That wasn't something everyone knew. That sounded like something you only knew if all your friends and relatives were avowed. Can you make any sound an Artonan can?" Khan shook his head. "Not quite. I'm assuming if the other spells in this category the system has stopped me and require it, I'll get additional mods. Awesome, Alden breathed. Con grinned. You're really into my dolphin impression. Most people think it's creepy. I wanted to be an adjuster so bad. The other boy tilted his head. Then why are you a rabbit? Alden didn't know what to say. Did you just get super nervous and accept the class assignment as soon as it popped up? I heard sometimes globies do that. Rabbit seemed like a really good idea at the time. Alden was unable to think of another excuse for himself that would make sense. Well, your shield thing is cool at least. Con picked up the fishing line and held the broken end to the piece still wrapped around the umbrella handle. He stared at it, performed the spell again, and the two pieces of line were reconnected. Thanks, Alden said, targeting him before he handed it back. I hope the school is as enthusiastic about it as you are. You sounded more confident this morning. Con shrugged. I'm confident the spell is capable of amazing things. And that I'll get more spells that do similar stuff in the future. And that my rank gives me a big advantage. But I'm not quite as sure that the school will be willing to risk it. Just because it's special doesn't mean it's going to be the right thing for hero work. Instructor Plim was really excited about it, but... You have a skill, too. Yeah. They might let me slip in because the skill alone has applications. Knowing the previous state of objects is an odd one to work with, too, though. So who knows? You use the skill before the spell every time. I have to, said Con. If I don't, it's like my brain can't conceptualize the exact state I'm trying to restore the object to. I can't even trigger the spell impression to cast without it. They both stopped talking as a man with a bushy mustache approached them. Con, he said, scrolling through something on his interface. Are you all right with the interview on your schedule being brought forward half an hour? We've had some dropouts. Sure. Then I'm sending you the update now. Alden, is your skill still working? We have you listed as having hit your limit during that last fight. I'm okay, said Alden. He was starting to feel tired. Approaching skill exhaustion was a strange experience now that he had an authority sense, and he didn't have a chaos attack to occupy him. It wasn't like the authority went away. It was almost like the world around him became resistant to it, and his authority itself became less authoritative, stiller, unwilling to be moved by his will or to move things around him in turn. I can keep going until the end of the combat assessment. The man rolled his eyes. You're one of those, are you? You don't know when skill fatigue will hit you, kid. Don't just assume you're tireless because your talent hasn't quit yet. Right. Act like a normal about, Alden. I mean my skill was still working fine the last time I used it. We'll give you one more duel then. Toward the end of the session. If it completely quits on you, just yield. No penalties for that. It's normal for it to hit low ranks in the last half of the combat assessment. He walked away. Ouch. He called me a low rank. The principal included us Bs with the rest of you in her speech this morning. She was being generous. Bs are usually high if you're living in F City and low if you're in Apex. You live between two worlds. What happened to middle? Why can't we be middles? Con shrugged. Maybe they'll build another island when we get a couple million more people, and we can call it Mid-City? Mid-City? Bs can hang there with the Cs. Feeling all superior. And then we mighty S's can have two islands to look down on instead of one. How long have you been an S rank even? About 4 months. Does the system affix a massive dose of self-confidence when it gives you that rank? It's just that I've been an S in my heart from a young age, said Con, holding a hand over his heart. My parents are both A's, so there was always a decent chance. He looked over at Alden. They'll put you against an S for your final duel. It's not random? It's semi-random. If it looks like you're toughing it out all the way to the end of the assessment, though, they'll make sure you get hit really bad at least once. If they can. It's a thing. A thing everyone knows, Alden said. Exactly. At least one terrible matchup if they can swing it. For you, any S who isn't me will do. And it won't be me, since I'm not dueling. It was all private testing with Instructor Plim. Except for me showing off my brother punching skill just now. Thanks for letting me know. Khan shrugged. You were cool in the fight. I thought you were way overestimating yourself when you said you could bonk the Shaper's sandbags with your umbrella. But you bonked them really well. My skills level 3. Khan looked startled. That's nice. Did you hide out and train for a year before you showed up here or something? But I still wouldn't have thought you'd just fling off those bags like they didn't weigh anything. They didn't. What? They didn't weigh anything. Alden pulled his legs up and crossed them. I should have realized. But I'm an idiot. I haven't seriously used my skill like this before. It would be uncommon if you had a lot of sandbag attack experience. No, I mean I haven't used it as a shield. It's not. That hasn't been its main function for me. I knew it would be a big thing for hero work. But up until now, it's the preservation element that's been important. Until the past couple of weeks, I usually really cared about keeping the thing I was carrying safe. So I'm geared to think of it that way. And I miss something incredibly obvious because of it. What? Khan asked curiously. I don't feel the force of things that impact my preserved object. Physically. He had definitely felt every impact in other ways. Impacts strain my skill. They make it reach the exhaustion point faster. I knew that. But if the magic takes the impact of outside things, it also takes their weight. I don't quite see where you're going with the victims, said Alden, staring across the gym without really seeing it. Whenever I've carried people before, it's been because they needed to be preserved. Their whole bodies. For their protection. Have you had to do something like that often? Khan said slowly. Alden ignored the question. And people are heavy. I just got so used to thinking of people as heavy things I have to preserve. But for this exercise, we needed to move fast. That was more important. So I suggested you carry the first girl because you're stronger. Right. You could have entrusted her gym suit to me instead. I mean, she could have. You mean you could turn her suit into a shield? Yes, but more importantly, she wouldn't have weighed anything inside it, said Alden, not even trying to keep the exasperation out of his voice. She would be carried by the magic wrapped around my preserved object. From my perspective, she would have weighed as much as a gym suit. It might not have been comfortable for her. But I could have carried her all that way in one hand. Khan stared at him. Are you sure? Yeah. Alden paused. I'm sure that it would have worked, but I guess the faculty would most likely have made us stop. I don't know how the suits and the bands work together with each other and in conjunction with the magic on the gym. Preserving just the suit. It could have been really bad if something had hit her somewhere unprotected, and the gym couldn't register it properly. That's a dark thought. Glad you didn't try it and find out the hard way. Khan stood up. I'm off to be grilled by an interview committee. It was fun to play superheroes with you. It sent me right back to primary school. Only there was never a rabbit in our superhero games. Even if you don't get into the program, you should come to that party at my house. Are you having it even if you don't get in? Don't jinx me, said Khan. And of course. It will be a consolation party in that case. Thank you for the invitation. Alden tapped his umbrella against his knee. By the way. Khan looked over his shoulder. You probably didn't have to cast your spell twice. You could have just done it once. The adjuster might have been an S rank, but that didn't mean he could infinite cast his spell. Impressions could be exhausted just like skills. They used their own discrete portion of your bound authority in a similar way. What do you mean? To repair the umbrella and the fishing line. You said you used the skill to read the object first. You could have used it on the umbrella and the fishing line at the same time. They are two different objects. No, they're not. Alden held it up. This is one object. Khan frowned. Imagine the line was superglued to the umbrella. Or that it was made that way from the start. Maybe by some writer who's way too fond of multifunction tools. In that case you would have read it as one cohesive piece, right? Right. Just something to consider. Good luck in your interview. Alden watched him leave. About 20 minutes later, he was called up for his final duel. The opponent was an S-rank speedster. He ran at Alden, dodged around the umbrella much faster than Alden could react to protect himself, and shoved him sideways into the barrier. Perhaps he was concerned about hitting a B-rank rabbit in the torso, because he shoved Alden's partially outstretched arm. Pain flared. Alden could have sworn he heard something pop as his shoulder dislocated. He shouted, but it came out muffled as the speedster grabbed the back of his head and pressed his face into the wall. For the first time all day, Alden felt fear. Then the 10 seconds passed, and his arm was completely fine. His panicked brain slowed down enough to realize the attack was already over. The S-rank was just pinning him to the barrier. He wasn't even trying to be harsh about it. The other boy was only going for maximum efficiency. It's way worse when it comes at you so fast. It makes it so that you can't even understand what's happening. His heart was racing. He would have dropped the umbrella if not for the wrist strap. His right arm was bent behind his back and held in a grip that didn't budge no matter how he tried to twist. "You good, pal?" the speedster asked in a Scottish accent. "Your nose all right?" "Fuck. I'm not sure whether this is sad, scary, or funny." His nose did, in fact, hurt. The guy was smashing his face into the barrier too hard. "You could crush me less," Alden finally admitted. It came out sounding like, "Who could cuff me left?" The Scottish boy let up on the pressure. "Sorry. You're my first beat. Didn't want you to get a hit in from being too careless. I'm on a winning streak." Alden cleared his throat. "It's fine. I feel like I've been here all day pressing people onto magic walls," the other boy mused. "It's not a fun way to spend time, is it?" "It's probably less fun for the people who are getting pressed into the walls, man. Guess that's why so many of them have left already, eh? Didn't think that was the right choice even if the rules did say we could go whenever we liked after the first fight." "It's definitely a trap," Alden agreed. "The locals didn't start leaving until halfway through. Suits must be nasty. Haven't taken a bad enough hit to feel it myself. Think they meant for that last meister to get me good, but I beat her, too. Sounds like you're doing well. I'm going to be a hero." The boy's accent was becoming heavier as he started talking faster. "I've always wanted to help people. I want to make a difference, you know? I never thought it would happen, but now it has. I'm going to be the hero I always imagined in my head. If you can just run fast enough, I used to think, you can save everyone, can't you?" Alden stared through the barrier. It wasn't quite invisible when you were being pressed against it. There was a fluctuation in the air. Beyond it, he could see the bleachers. They were nearly empty. Most of the people who weren't currently dueling had already left, either to head to interviews, to move on to other assessments, or just to go back home and lick their wounds and reassess their life choices. "I hope it works out that way for you," Alden said as the timer ran out and their duel officially ended. "I hope you get in, get your dream job, and it works out just like you imagined." The speedster gave him a confused look. "Thank you." "You too," said Alden, saluting with his umbrella. "Good fight." It was informative. Line of asterisks. Alden only had minutes between the last duel and his interview. It was barely enough time to change back into his normal clothes. He didn't have to bother. Plenty of people didn't. But he wanted to make the best impression he could, and sweaty unitard guy wasn't that. He stripped and toweled off in the same shower stall he'd gotten dressed in a few hours before. The morning had been so intense that time was behaving differently. It felt like it had been a week since he met Maricel on the bus. He hoped her own combat assessment had gone well. She'd been in the group that had done it right before his. I wonder if they gave her sandbags to use. He wrapped his ori out around his wrist and covered it with a leather cuff bracelet. Actually, I wonder what stats she has. Now that I've met other beginner S ranks, she seems outside the norm. Maricel had been stronger and faster than Alden when they were practicing with the suits, but not stronger and faster enough. She couldn't have sunk an S rank's worth of points into processing, and dexterity seemed like an odd choice for her. Maybe she'd gone for ultra-specific enhancements. Or it was all in stamina. He threw on the green plaid shirt and stepped out to take a quick look in the mirror. Decent. Now, don't say anything dumb in your interview. And remember, you're sure you want to be a superhero. Often during the application process, especially when he was writing essays or answering questions about goals, Alden had felt like he was trying to time travel. Why do you want to join the program? Why do you think you'd make a good superhero? What does being a hero mean to you? He had some answers to those questions, but they weren't the answers anyone else wanted to hear. They weren't shiny. They weren't charming. So he relied on Alden from a year ago instead. He'd had all the answers back then. And they were shiny. They sounded good in person and on paper. He remembered them all by heart because he'd meant them for such a long time. Is it still a lie if I'm just trying to copy a younger version of myself? The version they would have gotten to meet if I'd shown up on the island when I was supposed to? It was. Of course. I wonder what Hannah would think of me now. She came to mind more often when he was on campus. Alden wanted to talk to her. Almost as much as he wanted to talk to Bo. He wanted to tell someone the things he wasn't willing to tell the other people who were curious. If Hannah hadn't died, he would have asked her if she minded him being different than the Alden she'd known. Walking down the hall to the classroom where his interview was being held, he met Leslie Sleyca. How did your final duel go, Alden? I lost really fast, Principal Sleyca. She chuckled. That tends to happen versus strong speedsters. She even knew who I was fighting. Did the principal keep track of everything that was going on? What did you think of it? She asked. Of the combat assessment overall. Or the last duel specifically? She smiled. The last duel. What did you think when you lost? That I need to get faster. Belatedly, he realized that might sound flippant, so he added, I know getting as fast as an S-rank speed brute would be ridiculous. But I'd like to at least be able to keep up well enough to understand what was happening as it happened and respond in some kind of way. I see. The principal's tone was friendly, but it didn't reveal what she thought of his answer. Thank you for all your hard work today. You've almost run the whole gauntlet. Good luck in your interview. She nodded to him, and they parted. A few seconds later, he heard her greeting another student heading into their own interview room. When he arrived at the right spot, he took a moment to collect himself before he knocked. The three interviewers were sitting at a table at the front of the classroom. The first thing Alden noticed was Skip, Chicago's very own water shaper. He stared at the hero in surprise. Of course he was wearing his board shorts. He'd been wearing them the last time Alden had seen him, too. And it had been freezing then. What are the chances that he'd be one of my interviewers? Is it on purpose? Well, Skip had always seemed to like all of the parts of hero work that involved hanging out with kids and teenagers. The fun, Big Brother PR stuff appeared to be his comfort zone. It stood to reason that he'd volunteer at his old high school, too. Beside him was a petite, older woman who was somehow making a rhinestone-studded, emerald green pinafore dress look like a casual thing to wear. The third member of the group was a strong-jawed man with blue eyes and short, graying hair. None of them were speaking to each other when Alden entered. They seemed kind of tense. Maybe they'd argued during the last interview? They all stood as he entered, and he shook everyone's hand, starting with the man on the right. Torsten Klein, he said. I teach some courses here at the high school. Offensive combat mostly. Nice to meet you. Hello, Alden, said the woman, leaning across the table. I'm not teaching at the high school, but we'll see each other eventually. I teach at the university and advise seniors who are finalizing their public personas. I just go by Colibri. My hero name grew on me over the years, so I made it official. Alden shook her hand. It makes sense that the university faculty would be involved, too. Graduates from the high school hero track were automatically accepted to the university one, so there was no question about where you'd eventually be going to school unless you dropped out or were booted. And I'm Skiff. Or Lawrence is fine. I haven't quite decided. You might, of course. It's really cool to meet you in person. He wasn't even lying. It was cool to shake hands with someone he'd been watching on television for several years. Bo would probably make fun of me. And remind me that the last time I saw this guy he was trying to figure out who had chainer for the Vulras or the anti-Vulras. Which team Skiff was doing a favor for that day when they'd walked past him at the consulate had never been settled. Alden sat in a chair facing the trio. So, tell us what kind of hero you imagine being in the future, Colibri said. Take as much time as you need. Okay. So it's that question. They'd asked it in both of the previous interviews. And it was the main subject of the essay he'd written. So it wasn't like he couldn't answer. He could answer it so well, in fact, that he didn't even have to think about most of the words coming out of his mouth. Battlefield support. The guy whose work makes the other heroes more effective. Hannah's dream. For the first time, Alden added on a bit about how difficult he'd found it to be the only responsible party on Munthagund. He was assuming they were finally going to ask him about what had happened in this interview, since it had barely been brought up the last one. I know lower-rank sidekicks, and even hero duos, aren't as popular these days unless they're... He tried to think of how to say just for the sake of the show without offending Instructor Colibri, who seemed to be someone who was in charge of making the show more showy. Unless they're unique cases. But I think there would be a lot of benefits to having a dedicated partner and learning the ins and outs of each other's power set. Working alone isn't the ideal scenario. That's a wonderful point, Colibri said brightly. Do you know why so many superheroes operate on their own when it comes to higher-level combat? Instructor Klein asked. You do see hero teams working together to fight regular crime. It makes for exciting footage if nothing else. So do you understand why an S-rank in pursuit of an equally powerful supervillain might prefer not to have help beyond the usual? Which is to have other individually capable members of the hero team evacuate civilians, relay critical information, and block off access to the battle site? It's for a lot of different reasons, isn't it? Alden said. He ticked them off. There's the whole what if I screw up and kill my partner factor. Which I'm sure makes a lot of people just not want to deal with it at all. Then there's the fact that you need to dedicate additional training time so that you understand how to fight alone and in a pair or team. Trust would be a huge issue. If you don't absolutely trust your partner to do their job, then what's the point? And if the support hero is, for example, functioning in a way that makes it possible for the primary damage dealer to safely deal more damage than they would otherwise be able to, then an error on the support's part means that their partner might cause much more harm to infrastructure and bystanders than they would have if they'd been working completely alone. It makes both heroes look bad, and it's the support's error. But people don't understand. They usually blame the person in the limelight who dealt the damage, not the person in the background who was supposed to prevent it. Instructor Klein looked surprised. Those are a lot of reasons. You've put some thought into it after all. I think it would be strange if I hadn't. Given what I want to do. And other things. In an urgent situation, rushing because she couldn't quite keep up with the pace of a fight, Hannah Elber had counted the number of floors on a building wrong. Because of that, Argent Thomas had smashed through the side of it and into an occupied apartment across the street. That he hadn't collided with Alden, or someone else, and instantly killed them was luck. Then why do you hope to become a support hero? Skiff seemed to be trying to give Alden an encouraging smile as he asked. I really enjoyed your essay by the way. Oh. Thank you. It's because heroes can work better in pairs. More good guys bringing more types of magic to a fight should be an amazing thing. The ideal situation is perfectly orchestrated teamwork. Just because it's more difficult to achieve that ideal doesn't mean we should give up on it and settle for the status quo. He felt good about that answer. It was so much more satisfying to give an answer that rang true. He tried to study the interviewers' faces, to get a read on what they thought. Skiff seemed to be in comforting cheerleader mode. It was probably his default. Or maybe he just liked Alden because of the Chicago connection. Instructor Colibri hadn't stopped smiling since he entered the room. It was a great smile. It didn't look fake at all. But it was confusing that it never faded. And for some reason, Instructor Klein looked tired and resigned. Not a fan of the support-focused superhero concept in general? Or of B ranks going for it? Support heroes, as he was describing them, were supposed to be able to take care of themselves well enough not to cause problems. Old-timey sidekicks were a thing of the past because they'd often been highly killable low ranks. Next question. Colibri said, still beaming. What active heroes do you currently admire? And why? Alden talked. And talked. He was on edge, waiting for the harder questions. They had to be coming. They'd rejected a ton of the returnees first thing this morning after a single, 5-minute-long interview. They must have asked something difficult. And Winston Reginald E.L. Feather was wearing sunglasses because he was so scared of the mind games he claimed his committee had played with him last time. However, as the time slot for his interview approached its end, they hadn't asked him anything that was even particularly new. These were all questions that had been on the application or in previous interviews. Occasionally, Instructor Klein would ask him to clarify his opinions, which made him think a little. But the questions were harder in the first interview. The formulaic ones on the B ranks only, "We really wish you'd reconsider applying" interview had been semi-hostile and stressful to answer because of it. With 2 minutes to go, Alden was confused. "I thought this would be deeper. I thought they'd want to really get to know me." It said something to that effect in the admissions office email he'd read 100 times, that prospective students should be prepared to answer more personal questions in the third interview. They've got to be sitting there with everything I sent them pulled up in front of their eyes. Maybe Body Trainer and Munthagund were considered too personal. But wasn't the point of this to make sure he had the right reasons for wanting to become a hero? Alden hadn't wanted them to ask if he had some kind of revenge-driven need to fight supervillains because one had killed his parents, but he'd expected them to. He had also been dreading detailed questions about how he'd earned the commendation. He was sure that someone idly saying the wrong thing about Kibby was his Achilles heel. Nothing had fazed him badly all day, but that definitely would have. He suspected that someone else overanalyzing and judging the harder decisions he had made on Munthagund would have set him off in some way, too. "I brought it up myself because I just knew something along those lines was coming. Was I completely wrong? Do they not care about the commendation at all? Do they not care that I've been on the true planets until just recently?" Maybe Neo was mistaken, and he wasn't getting the serious questions because he wasn't a serious candidate at this point. They could have already decided he wasn't good enough, or that he was too much of a risk with a messy personal history. And so there was no reason to ask him the hardball stuff. That must be it. They're not even asking me about being a rabbit. That's got to be the surest sign that they're not taking my interview seriously at all. Even if the darker personal material was off limits, asking the superhero hopeful why he'd chosen nearly the worst possible class for superhero work was so obvious. They should have been grilling him about that one. As Alden reached the conclusion that it was all over for him, this time around at least, he tried not to let his disappointment show. "I really did try hard. I know I'm not feeling it quite like I should, but I do want it and I didn't slack off any. It's fine. I'll just spend a lot more time with Bobby at the gym while I wait to reapply. I'll go to Franklin High for a while. Maybe I'll apply to the other 2 Apex High schools next time, too." "Thank you so much for your time today, Alden," Colibri said. "It's been wonderful to get to know you better. Do you have any questions for us before we send you off to lunch?" So it was over. How anticlimactic after the intensity of the combat assessment. Since it looks like I'll be doing this again in the future, I guess I should ask. I was wondering if there was anything I should think about or do to improve myself. I know I'll be getting evaluations from the people who were watching combat today, but are there other obvious things I'm missing right now that I should be aware of? "I think you're on the right track," Skiff said. "Just keep working and keep your chin up, and you'll get there." Alden hoped his smile looked realer than it felt. "You should think about what kind of impression you want to give off in front of cameras starting right now," Instructor Colibri said. For the first time since the interview had started, she seemed really intense. "Point placement is going to be so important for you as a B rank. Rabbit hasn't ever been seriously attempted in the superhero market, so you have options. But that only means you have to narrow your choices down that much more. The bouncing things you can do with your trait, so she'd at least seen some footage from the running assessment. It makes me so happy. You may want to play into that. Speedy, agile rabbit. And don't neglect your appeal. You have to make it work for you every step of the way. The system will just generalize it if you don't make special requests, and no, that's for amateurs. You want to be a professional, so you have to decide as soon as you can and start tweaking. Cute. Soft. Sexy. Ironically macho bunny. Alden stared at her. Her hand disappeared and reappeared from the front pocket of her spangled pinafore so fast that he didn't even see her move. In a blink, she was holding out a hummingbird-shaped card. The foil letters on it showed her name, address, and school office hours. Call any time. Definitely before you affix it next appeal point. I don't want another one, though. Alden took the card because you couldn't just not take people's cards. But he found her a little frightening. When you start living on campus, we can. You want my advice? Instructor Klein interrupted. Halfway through the interview, he'd crossed his arms over his chest, and he hadn't removed them since. The body language there definitely wasn't inviting. Skiff's eyebrows went up and he bit his lower lip as he glanced sideways at the other man. If you don't mind? Alden said. Your rank is bad for what you think you want to do. Your class may very well be insurmountable. I think that's an uncalled-for assessment, Instructor Klein. Instructor Colibri said quickly. I personally believe in the untapped potential of the rabbit class. I can't wait to see what Alden does with it. The other teacher didn't even spare her a glance. My advice is that you focus on leveling for the next couple of years before you even consider joining a hero training course. And do some research into other skill options for your class. If you can't put together a list of known rabbit skills and spells that will see you performing as well as other currently active B-rank heroes who are in their 30s and 40s, then you should find another job. Torsten. After doing my own research into your class's talent choices, I do not believe you have the potential to be a superhero. Thus, you attending Chelena North High is a waste of your potential as a person. And it is a waste of our faculty's time. I recommend that you enjoy a normal high school experience, learn your way around devout life, and then, if you are still determined to try this path in a couple of years, return and apply for the university's hero program instead. He really doesn't want me to come to school here. It wasn't that his words were a shock. But they were harsh on the heels of so much hard work today and such unexpectedly lackadaisical questions from the interviewers. Alden took a few seconds to collect himself. Okay, he said at last. Thank you for the super honest advice. You're worried that one preservation skill isn't enough to see me through an entire career. It's not enough, he said bluntly. One skill is not enough for hero work. Colibri looked pissed off. Skiff was chewing on the end of his stylus. That makes sense, said Alden. He was having an emotionally confused moment. His hands were death-gripping his shirt hem, because having someone tell you to your face that they thought you sucked and would be a waste of everyone's time was. Yeah. But on the other hand, he tried not to smile. He thought he might have a little anyway. Rabbit is a skill-based class. So the skills I choose are the most important thing. If let me take your luggage is the only one in the class that's really good for hero work, and it tops out at a low level, that would be a career ender. Instructor Klein uncrossed his arms and rested his elbows on the table. That's just a fact you have to contend with, he said. Facts are facts, Alden thought in Artonin. They don't have to be fair. He could practically hear Kibby saying it. Oh, it was a mistake to think of her. He was really smiling now. It probably looked like he didn't take the instructor seriously. That was bad. It was Earth-bad intraplanets unforgivable. I will consider that, he said, forcing his face straight. I will seriously think about what you said. Thank you for interviewing me. He shook their hands again. He hurried out of the room so that he wouldn't lose his self-control and start laughing in front of them. It's not that funny, Alden, he told himself as he rushed down the hall to get out of earshot. This is serious. They think you stink. They are not going to let you into their school ever, even if you did run across a moon and impress a knight. Welcome to Earth, where you are only a shitty B rank, and an even shittier rabbit. He just kept going until he was out of the Majiffies building and racing across the lawn. His legs were sore from all the weird running demands the coaches had made at the track earlier. It felt good to move anyway. Why'd they even bother to make me hop around the track and fight an S rank and come all this way if rabbit was that much of a problem for them? He ran down the paved pathway, jumped over the back of a bench, and took a seat. He leaned back and smiled up into the tree branches. One skill is not enough for hero work, he said. Then he did laugh. And he directed his growing amount of free authority to run along the edges of the affixation, to really feel the shape of what it, too, would one day be. Most of the hypersensitivity was gone. He still woke up in the middle of the night feeling wounded. He still fought it when he knew he shouldn't. But right now. Hey, we did amazing today, he murmured. You worked like a dream. I'll try to think up a better metaphor for us, like she told me to. Because you can be pretty cool. And you're going to get big. And strong. And awesome. He considered the epiphany he'd had earlier. I wonder if we could pick up a car? That's probably way too greedy at this point. But just think of how much luggage we could carry now. Chapter 79. Alden stretched out on the bench where he'd planted himself after his interview had ended. The weather outside was pleasant enough, and it seemed like a good place to decompress and kill time. He turned his thoughts toward his priority contact list, and it appeared. His attention lingered on Bo's name at the top for a few seconds. Bo would have had so much to say about his magic, the interview, and all the people he'd met today. The more time passed without hearing from him, the more Alden dwelled on random details of their last few days together, as if they had some special significance. He was upset about me moving away and leaving him behind. He said so. He hardly ever admits stuff like that. But then he turned the conversation right back to what was going on with me, and I let him. Then Skiff was watching the consulate, and we were researching Powers and Hannah's funeral. It had all happened in a couple of days. Those couple of days had been insane, and the insanity had all centered on Alden. It would have calmed down if things had gone the way they expected. Alden would have gotten his head on straight after coming back from Leaf Song, and he wouldn't have just brushed past the fact that becoming avowed meant leaving his oldest friend behind for good. What if that was the last time? He threw the thought as far away from himself as he could and selected Jeremy's name from the contact list like it was a lifeline. "Hey," Jeremy said as soon as the call connected. "How'd it go, man?" He was in the back seat of his dad's car. His family was taking a trip this weekend, and his older sister, Sarah, was leaning over in her seat to see Alden's face on the cell phone screen. "It was an eternal morning," said Alden. "An S-rank ground shaper from Manila gave me a flower, and we had our first ever fist fights together. I ran around the track in every possible way you could imagine except for normal running. I met a lot of people, fought some of them with an umbrella. I had an interview with some superheroes. All Jeremy's done today is drop a fried chicken sandwich on the floor of the car and then eat it anyway," Sarah informed Alden. "What else was I going to do? Let good food go to waste? There was hair on it. There was not. And even if there was, it probably belonged to someone related to me. So it doesn't count. Gross. Family germs aren't real germs," Jeremy said. "Tell her, Alden." Alden's got class. He's not going to agree with that. "If I could eat floor chicken right this second, I would," Alden said with a grin. "Sorry, Sarah. Told you." Jeremy adjusted his seat belt. "You're done with everything now, right? I just have a long lunch break ahead of me. They make the final decisions this afternoon. We're supposed to stay on campus and wait to hear if we got in." He sighed. "I don't think I did. The assessments didn't go badly, but my interview was. Well, at least one of the interviewers thinks I'm a waste of time. And the other two only asked me the blandest questions. It was like they didn't really care what my answers were. Screw them, then." Sarah spoke passionately. "They don't deserve us." "Us?" "She just had a bad scholarship interview," Jeremy told him. I guess that makes you bandmates or something. You rose from the dead. Sarah said. Did any of the other super teens do that? No. They did not. They should be begging you to come to their school. I wasn't actually dead. And we're very glad about that. Their mom called from the front seat. But, Alden, don't encourage my son to eat things off the floor. We've only just gotten him civilized. Sorry, Mrs. Levi. For the next few minutes, he watched the Levis chatter. Jeremy, his parents, and his sister had always seemed like a wholesome sitcom family. Alden was sure it was different from the inside, but he couldn't help being slightly fascinated by them. A text notification popped up, and when he checked it, he found it was from Maricel. I am at Cafeteria North. Is that an invitation? I think someone wants me to have lunch with them, Alden said. You can't tell? Jeremy asked. They just told me they were at the cafeteria. You should go. It can't be that interesting to watch me and Sarah argue about whether the animals we just saw out the window were goats or sheep. They were hair sheep, said Alden. I saw them, too, but I didn't want to side against you. Line of asterisks. Cafeteria North was the university campus's largest dining hall. There were plenty of other places to eat, including a dining hall and a coffee shop for the exclusive use of students in the high school, but it seemed like almost all of the applicants had chosen to eat here today. It wasn't open to the public, so for most of them, this would be their only chance to try it out. It's even cooler than it looked in pictures, Alden thought as he passed through a short hallway that was themed to look like an alley between old buildings. A moment later, he found himself standing in a place that might have been transplanted here from a postcard. The university website said the cafeteria was an homage to the most beautiful city squares in Europe, and though Alden didn't have the real-life experience to say whether or not they'd gotten it right, they'd definitely made it impressive. The floor was cobblestone. The transparent ceiling overhead was so perfectly clear it would have been difficult to believe it existed if not for the lack of Isidor's usual wind. And the different food options took the form of individual restaurants around the edges of the square, complete with indoor or outdoor seating options. At the center of it all, was a giant marble fountain. On weeknights, there was supposed to be live music from student bands, but right now there was a soundtrack of people singing in German. The cafeteria wasn't particularly crowded, even though they were in the middle of what should have been the lunch rush. Alden assumed a lot of students took advantage of the weekends to get off campus and enjoy the rest of Apex. He found Maricel sitting at a table under an umbrella, just getting started on a steamed seafood platter that looked like it was meant to feed 3. You cut all of your... Alden stared at her. Your hair looks nice. He sat in the chair across from her and pulled his own lunch out of his bag. It looks like I asked a maester of knives to chop it all off for me with 5 seconds left before a duel. Maricel was twisting the tail off a whole lobster. The first girl I fought grabbed me by my ponytail and dragged me around the dueling block. So it had to go. My mother is going to cry when she sees it. I know a rabbit who'd love to work on it for you. Maricel shoved lobster meat into her mouth with a hand and glared at a clam. She seemed a little more feral than the last time Alden had seen her. How was it today? He asked. Other than the ponytail grabbing. I did all right. Maybe. I don't know greater than. It's a blur greater than. Did you win any at all? Are you just assuming I lost all of my fights because I'm a rabbit? Rude. Alden opened the lid on his takeout container. I definitely won one. And lost 2. And the others were more complicated. More people involved. But I don't think I did badly at combat. Especially not compared to most of the other B ranks I saw. Your evals? They haven't come in. They will soon, she said. Mine showed up an hour after the combat assessment finished. It's just a paragraph of notes from the heroes watching you. One of the shapers gave me permission to contact them and talk about it more, though. That's really great, Maricel. That means they thought you were a serious contender, right? I don't know. The interview was bad. There is a boy sneaking up on you. Alden turned in his seat to see Con, wearing an innocent expression, standing a yard away. "I wasn't sneaking," he protested, holding up his hands. "I was walking normally." "Are you two saving seats for other people from intake, or?" "We don't like the other candidates from intake," Maricel said. "We fought with them on the bus." "We didn't," said Alden. "It was just a tense morning. And I don't even really know any of the other people from the bus." "I don't like the other candidates from intake," Maricel clarified. "You do like shellfish, though," Con said, his eyes on the enormous platter of food. It was free. Con grabbed a chair beside Alden, and Alden carefully put his arm between the adjuster and his lunch. "What are we having?" Con asked, smiling and peering into Alden's container. "I am having vegan chili, chips, and guacamole." "I don't know what you're having." "You should both get the free food," said Maricel. "I already ate," Con replied. "But there's a lady who comes through the square every now and then with a waffle cart. I'm going to sit here until she reappears. Or until Alden decides to be friendly and let me taste his magic chili." "It's magic?" Maricel said, standing up from her seat to look at Alden's lunch. She frowned. "It looks healthy." "It is healthy," he said. "I am a lowly B rank who is to maximize everything, so everyone knows I deserve to be here. US people, eat your waffles and your lobsters, and stop drooling over my nutritionally balanced lunch." "It smells like my grandma made it," said Maricel, sniffing the air. "It smells like my grandma made it, too," said Con. "That's how you know it's magic. One of them hates to cook, and the other thinks growing boys have to be fed meat at every opportunity. I don't think she's ever encountered vegan chili in her life." Then he looked at Maricel. "You're an S?" She nodded. "She's a shaper," said Alden. "Ground. That's a good subclass for hero work. Hey, since nobody else is sitting with you two, I'm inviting some people I know over to meet you." Maricel narrowed her eyes at Alden, as if this was somehow his fault, but it couldn't be helped now. Con was already saying, "Yes, we're in front of the fish place," to someone through the system. Alden scooped up some chili and guacamole with a chip and leaned across the table to set it on top of one of Maricel's shrimp. By the time he sat back down, he was another chip short, and Con was making crunching sounds. Watching the expressions on their faces was almost worth the loss of the food. Maricel held a hand over her stomach. "It's warm, greater than," she said in a breathless voice. "Now I know what it feels like to be embraced by an avocado," said Con. They both stared at Alden's remaining lunch with big eyes. "No way. Get your own private chefs." A few minutes later, Alden was completely surrounded by Anisidran teens. Con had dragged the neighboring table over, and there were now 9 people sitting together, with 2 more on the way after they fetched their lunches. They were all varying amounts of nervous and hyped, and the conversation was all over the place. Alden had given up on catching everybody's name, and he was just letting it all flow around him. How did I end up at the popular kids table? That was what it seemed to be. A transplanted collection of cool kids who all knew each other from school had found themselves here together. They were mostly a year younger than him. They'd gotten their S's and A's right on schedule. A couple of them were unhappy about their subclasses, but most had managed to trade into exactly what they'd planned for. Everyone was worried Con had made a mistake with his choice and would have to go to CNH Sciences instead. It's crazy that they've always known this was where they were headed. For everyone in intake, it came like a lightning strike. Or a lottery win. There were people still walking around in a state of shock months in, trying to get used to the idea that their lives were not going to be anything like they had thought. Even if you're someone who wanted it, like me, that's not at all the same as knowing you're going to get it and really understanding what it is you're getting. Just listening to them talk was highlighting the worldview differences and the experience gap. Some of them had their talent choices mapped out for the next 5 years. Their combat evaluations were trickling in, and the excitement about the names of the heroes who'd watched their performances was high, but definitely different than it would have been if Alden had been sitting with other Globies. Titania gave me advice about balancing my stats. She was my aunt's roommate in college. Blade of Red was one of my evaluators. He thinks I'm stupid. Next time I see him around Harmonia Promenade I'm going to have to hide my face. They'd been sitting around for almost an hour when Alden's own evals finally came in. Everyone else had been loudly announcing when they received theirs and reading some of the comments out loud. He glanced over his and winced. They were complimentary. Judah Blake, an adjuster who'd risen to popularity when he'd caught a speedster in a flashy lightning spell on an interstate during rush hour, even said he'd enjoyed watching Alden more than any of the other students he'd evaluated today. But there was a clear note of, "You did really well for what you are," in 3 of the evaluations. And while Argent Thomas's critiques and compliments were thoughtful and implied that he was taking Alden's ambitions seriously, there was also an uncomfortably strong warning that he should be resting right now and not letting people push him into things. What people are pushing me into what things? Alden wondered, baffled. Also, how is it not unfair for Mr. Thomas to be my evaluator? Alden didn't know whether the superhero would be biased in his favor or against him, but it seemed really unlikely that he wouldn't be biased in some kind of way. Unlike Hannah, the Brute had always kept his distance. But if Alden had been trying to evaluate Arjun, his own emotions would get in the way. He didn't see how it could be much different in reverse. "Did you finally get them?" Maricel texted. She was crammed in between a tall boy with a mole on his nose and a petite, anxious Meister girl with bob-cut black hair. She and Alden had been texting occasionally for privacy. Maricel couldn't do it mentally, so Alden always knew when one was incoming, since her fingers started waving around. "I'm doomed," he texted back. "They feel sorry for me and think I should do some other meaningful thing with my life." At least nobody else in the group was likely to ask him to share. Khan was busy trying to carry on 3 different discussions at once, and the others had started treating Alden like he didn't exist after the initial novelty of having a rabbit in their midst wore off. It was absolutely an elitist thing, since they kept trying to cajole Maricel into talking. You couldn't even blame them for it. They thought she was likely to be chosen. Apparently, she'd been more impressive than she let on during her combat and skill assessments, and chopping off her hair had left an impression on people. Depending on what they thought of their own chances, she was either competition or a potential future classmate. Alden was just some weak boy con the social butterfly had bumped into, and he would probably disappear from their lives after today. The waffle cart finally appeared. While everyone was eating hot waffles covered in sinful toppings and Alden was staring at the mountains of whipped cream with longing, they all received a message announcing that the last of the interviews and personal assessments had just been completed. The faculty members involved in the selection process were now meeting to make their final judgments. "Thank you for all your hard work today. Please enjoy your time on campus while you wait." "It's nice that they tell us," Alden said. Before anyone could reply, another message appeared. "We have one final question for all applicants. Please read through the following legal agreement. If you agree not to disclose the final question, choose I agree." Alden was surprised. But he was just about the only one. Except for Maricel, whose brows had lifted, the others were still chewing on their waffles and talking about other things while they made scrolling motions in the air. Maricel shrugged at him. Alden selected the I agree option, and the final question appeared. During today's combat assessment, injury realism was set to 40-75%, depending on the severity and nature of the injuries received. Students accepted into the Superhuman Studies and Talent Development program here at Chelena North High will sometimes be expected to train with minimal or no realism reduction. In the future, combat training may also involve encountering talents that were off-limits on the gym floor today. This includes, but is not limited to, mental manipulation. If you wish to pause your application, you may. If you choose, you may return during a future admission cycle with no need to redo the written application or pass the first 2 interview stages. Do you still wish to be considered for admission today? Yes/no. It's meant to be a shock, Alden realized. Finding out that the injuries that felt so real weren't as bad as they should have been. The lighter punches and kicks, at least, were most likely close to realism, and it was the things like broken bones, eviscerations, and burns that had been heavily reduced, It makes sense that the pain reduction is a feature of the gym. You need to be able to give the fights consequence and keep people from getting sloppy, but too much pain would just mess everyone's heads up. Oh, not just pain either. Realism. Alden had thought he heard something in his arm snap when the S-rank speedster hit him earlier. So the gym must be capable of much more disturbing effects when the faculty wanted it to be. He clicked yes. He didn't feel any hesitation about the surprise question. And even if everyone here thought he stank, he still wanted to get into their school, so what else was there to do? It's not like there are Tonin-made combat gyms to practice your powers in all over the island. When he was finished, he looked across the table. Maricel was still biting her lip. She hadn't made her decision yet. Whoa, one of Khan's friends said. That whole table is clearing out. He was gesturing toward a group of other applicants sitting in front of the cafeteria menu restaurant that served French food. Alden had been glancing at them from time to time because Max was sitting there. It looks like they're all bees. They probably got destroyed in some of their duels, so I guess if they didn't know it wasn't completely realistic. A girl said. But that's my from school. Greater than someone else protested. She already knew, so why is she giving up? Greater than. Maybe she's still upset about getting B. She was expecting a higher rank. Maybe, said Khan, watching the people leaving the cafeteria. But that adjuster has been nudging the other bees to quit all day. What adjuster? The one guy who's still sitting at the table. His name is Max, said Alden. You know him? Khan asked. No. I just met him earlier. We had our running test together. How do you nudge someone to quit after they spent months applying? Someone asked. He seems. I don't know how to put it. Khan frowned. He's cutthroat friendly. And really good at making people mad when he wants to be, too. He suggested to a big group this morning that offering everyone the chance to leave combat assessment early could be the school's way of seeing if we had a reasonable sense of our own limitations, Alden said. Everyone exchanged looks. I'm impressed, one girl said. That sounds surprisingly legit. Even if it's wrong. Did he not know? Greater than. It's not his first time doing this, so he definitely knew, said Alden. Well, he's evil. Is there a school for villains? What a jerk. You guys all know how everything here works, and it's not like you try to give those of us who don't a heads up, thought Alden. All day long, the locals and the returnees had little advantages over the newcomers. There's a difference but not much of one. Alden thought Max's strategy was cutthroat, as Khan had said. Definitely not sportsmanlike. But he wasn't quite willing to call it evil without further evidence. Even the suggestion about quitting after a single duel was just one-upping the school's own lie. The school gives people an excuse to take the easy way out. Max makes it even easier for them to do it. The people who really want to prove themselves or test their strength stick around anyway, said a sky shaper wearing a dark blue pantsuit. She sat so straight in her seat that it felt like a condemnation of all the slouchers at the table. Deceitful suggestions aren't going to knock you out of the running if you were serious to begin with. I was just watching him because I was trying to check out all of the adjusters, said Khan. And then I realized he was winning duels by goading people into kill-shotting him. Hey! He's that guy. I saw that. A spear right to the chest. Ow. I was petrified they'd pair him with Lexi, Khan concluded. I texted him so many warnings. People who allow themselves to be goaded into kill-shotting aren't serious candidates either, said the girl. You're always so self-righteous, Vandy. Greater than. All of us who've chosen to be here today are trying to become heroes, Vandy said in a surprised tone. What kind of hero would throw a spear through someone's chest because they said something annoying? A few people shifted in their seats. A boy rolled his eyes. At least we won't have to worry about him. He's just a bee. Sometimes they don't even pick any. By my powers, I'm so nervous now that I know they're doing the final judging, the Meister beside Maricel said. She shoved her half-eaten waffle aside and pressed her forehead to the table. By my powers was the dorkiest bit of avowed lingo Alden had learned so far. He'd heard a couple of these guys say it. He wondered if it sounded cooler in other languages. It does feel like we're waiting for them to decide our whole futures. If one of us doesn't get in, we can do the late December cycle. We'll still be able to start in January and have our first full quarter with everyone else. Greater than. Can't I have your waffle if you're really too nervous to eat it, Tayet? You know, statistically, a lot of us won't get in, one of the guys said slowly. They are going to accept 40 to 50 students today. If all of us got in, we'd be a quarter of the whole group. Let's be a quarter of the group. How many people are left anyway? I saw a lot of globies leaving already. Greater than. So many of the repeaters got cut during their interviews. I saw some people crying and having talks with the faculty during combat. I'm sure they left. Yeah, plenty of them bought as soon as it was time to duel. Dominic from my class shook his head and said, I think I made a mistake, and walked out. It was worse than I thought it would be. You've been training for 6 months, Justine. What did you have to be scared of? You think having people run at you with swords stops being scary because I've trained more than them? Maricel texted Alden. I said yes to the question. Did you? He nodded. Most of them are so confident, she said. They are. It's interesting to listen to them, though. Do you think it will be mostly people like these, who grew up here, who get in? He was surprised she didn't know that already. It will be. So many high-ranking about are born here. And you see how much prep time they've had compared to us. He did think this group was being too optimistic about their chances in general, though. A lot of candidates had left, but there were plenty who hadn't. It would be surprising if this whole friend cluster was accepted. The afternoon wore on. Most of the food places closed to prep for dinner, and Cafeteria North cleared out except for current students occasionally wandering through to grab something from the 24/7 snack shop. Maricel started up a quiet conversation with Tayet. Alden wondered if it was his imagination or if she was smiling more than she had been earlier. Among the other hopefuls, the energy was turning anxious. I heard one time they left people waiting so long that they didn't get home until the next day. That's just a rumor. I'll die. My whole family keeps calling to ask if I know yet. Greater than. We could go for a run to blow off steam? Brutes can go for a run. The rest of us are tired from fighting you monsters. We could do tricks with our powers. We've already showed off all our tricks at school, haven't we? Alden, just preserve us all, so we can skip to the good part of the day, Khan said suddenly. Silence fell. Alden had been resting his head on his arms, trying to plan out how to maximize the next couple of months so that he'd be in better shape to try again next time after the school rejected him. At Khan's words, he looked up. Everyone was staring at him as if surprised to find him sitting among them. Yeah, hi. I'm still here. My legs hurt too much, he said to Khan. They made me hop around the track like a frog. Backwards. I don't want to haul your heavy asses around for hours. Khan grinned. I think I've found a pure extrovert. How can he not be tired of interaction after getting this much of it? Wait, does the rabbit control time? Another guy demanded. Because if the rabbit controls time, you should have opened with it when you introduced him. Instead of saying, he makes a she-umbrella. I don't control time. Instructor Plim would not shut up about the fact that you might control time, Khan said. I spent ages with her today. She's a fan. I think she's a fan of weirdos in general. Yeah, we're her favorites, but, does Alfred control time or not? No, said Alden. My skill just prevents time from having an effect on things I'm carrying. I think. If he really dug into it, he had to start asking himself questions like what is time? And then his brain would break. No wonder, Khan. The guy looked from him to Alden. You know he wants his ultimate spell path to be something temporal? Since he's trailblazing it, nobody knows what the system is going to offer him when he levels. Probably, he's an overpowered repairman. Go bite your mother. It's pure time control. Your object reading skill could be a hub instead of a launch pad. Maybe your next spells are something that make use of it in a completely different time. control. If the Artonans could actually reverse time on a large scale, I feel like they would be doing it a lot. And if someone could heal a person the way you fix objects, that would already be happening. And they wouldn't share time travel with anyone else. Greater than, just accept the fact that they aren't stupid enough to accidentally give human kids a universe-breaking ability. Khan was ignoring them. When I become the master of time, I'm going to call myself Contempus, he said to Alden. With a K. So you have to pick a different superhero name for yourself. Alden smiled. How did you know I wanted that one? I've got a message from the school. Someone screamed from all the way across the cobblestone square. It happened at the exact same moment that Alden's own message notification flashed. A few people squealed or swore, surprised despite the fact that this was what they'd all been waiting for, but most of them fell silent. I can't open it. What if you all get in, and I don't? Tayet whispered. Well, it's on your interface, so it's not like we can open it for you, another girl snapped, suddenly irritable. All around Alden, people were freezing or taking deep breaths. They were reaching up with shaking fingers to open their messages. To start with, he watched them instead of opening his own. 10 seconds later, almost every face underwent a massive change. Smiles fell. The boy who'd just been teasing Khan stood and stalked away. I didn't get in, a girl said, her lips trembling. My whole family went to this school. And I didn't get in. She burst into tears, and her friend did the same a moment later. They hugged each other. Alden looked at Maricel. Her jaw was set. She nodded once. In other parts of the room, people were crying, running away from their tables, or in a few cases, shouting with glee. A boy with a bright blue mohawk jumped into the fountain at the center of the square and ripped his t-shirt in half from the neck down. Jeffy got in. He bellowed. Did any of us get in? A girl with a long ponytail was looking around the joint tables. Did we all fail? I've been admitted, said Vandy. The Sky Shaper stood up. I'm going to go tell that boy to get out of the fountain. There's a sign that says not to do that. Only Vandy? Said Ponytail, watching the other girl jog toward the fountain. I know she's an S, but... Rodrigo, did you? He shook his head. Yasmin? Yasmin cried harder. I got in, said Tayet, looking stunned. I got in. You guys. I got in. I can go to school with all of you, Alden winced. We didn't get in. Only you and Vandy. Tayet's face fell. I got in, Khan said quietly from his seat beside Alden. Despite seeming relaxed enough up until now, he looked very relieved. Your power doesn't even do anything though, one of the others muttered. Khan raised his eyebrows. Well, it's true, but... Sorry. I'm going to go. I need to think. He stood up quickly and left. How'd everyone else do? Khan asked. Nobody answered. I got in, Maricel said after the silence had stretched so long that it became awkward. They only took the S's. It's not fair. They had to know better. CNH didn't only take S's. They had the advantage, but there were more A's in the program than there were representatives of the highest rank. It just hadn't worked out that way for this particular clique. Alden finally opened his own message and read it, already knowing what it would say. Dear Alden, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into Chelena North's preparatory program, as a Y1Q2 student in the School for Superhuman Studies and Talent Development. Congratulations. Please proceed. What? That's not what it's supposed to say. He read it again. They let me in. Excitement ran through him, but it was slightly tainted by confusion. I did it. I guess? Even though Instructor Klein said I was a waste of time. I think I might have misunderstood something. The sound of a chair scraping loudly on the floor broke his concentration. You're just leaving while Yasmin's crying? Yeah, Khan said, giving all of his friends an apologetic look. The acceptance letter says we're supposed to meet some of the faculty and the other people who got accepted in half an hour, so. Maricel and Tayet had just shoved their chairs back. Alden stood up. Wait, did you get in, too? Khan asked. I did. Maricel let out a relieved sigh. That was nice of her. Everyone else was staring. After a second, Con broke into a smile. That's great. That Max guy just blew Heaven a kiss and left looking like he was walking on clouds, so I knew he was in. And the number of B slots are so limited. You're probably the only other one this time. Way to go. Thanks, said Alden. He could feel himself smiling. He'd dreamed of going to this school for years. And it had been such an unattainable dream. And now it was happening. It was a little too thrilling for him not to feel thrilled. Despite an undercurrent of disappointment. They half-assed my interview, but it wasn't because I was pre-rejected. It was because I was pre-accepted. No reason to traumatize and grill the moon victim who's already got his foot in the door. Damn it. Neo was right. It's a good thing, too, but he tried really hard. He'd spent 20 hours on the stupid essay. He'd been training with Bobby as much as she would let him. He hadn't chickened out during their combat assessment. I've been doing my best. I wanted it to matter more. He would just have to make it matter. He was here to train his powers and get stronger. He would do that. Con clapped him on the shoulder as he pushed his chair back under the table, and Alden smiled at him. Guess we're classmates. They headed toward one of the exit alleys. What cue did you get? Con asked. Quarter 1, said Maricel. 2, said Alden and Tiet. Nice. I'm 2 as well. So we've all pretty much got the same amount of high ahead of us. Before we hit uni together. And then. The world. Maricel blinked. We're going to be classmates for a long time. It's going to be epic, said Con. Let's go shake hands with the principal and make our best first year impressions. Tope continued. Thanks for listening.